Thank you for listening to the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast, where hope matters. I'm Jimmy Hinton.
And I'm Clara Hinton, and we're so glad that you've joined us.
If you're new to the podcast, please subscribe and share so you never miss an episode. Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast. Today we're going to talk about the storm that continues. Last time we talked about the storm after the calm, some of the events leading up to my father's arrest, and we're just going to continue that conversation because there's just so much packed into that. I'm going to start off by talking about a couple of things, and then I'll hand it over to Mom and let her talk about some things from her perspective. But I remember getting a phone call from the detective after my dad had been called in to the police station for questioning. And I got a call from the detective, and she said, "Your dad just left the police station, and you can probably be expecting a call from him," just because I was... out of all 11 kids, I was the one who he talked to about just about everything. And so sure enough, pretty much as soon as she hung up, my phone rings and it was him. And he said, "There's something I need to get off my chest." And so I just played dumb because I didn't want him to know that we had turned him in, because I didn't know what kind of a confession there was. I had no idea what he had told the police. So I drove over to his apartment. He was living by himself at the time, just a couple blocks from my house. And the only way I can describe it is it was just incoherent. And he said, I'm in so much trouble. I'm going to spend the rest of my life in prison." And I said, "Why? What did you do?" "Well, it wasn't anything that bad, but we live in this stupid country with all these dumb laws, and, if this were any other country, what I would have done over there would have been acceptable. But, we live in this stupid country, and I'm just in big trouble." And I said, "What did you do?" And he said, "Well, there were these girls, and it was... it was all innocent. There was nothing that I did. I touched them, and it could have been perceived as being bad touch." And he just went on and on and on and on. And I mean, none of it made sense. And at that point, I think he was just trying to talk and give information without actually giving me anything. But by that point, I knew a lot of what he had done. And so I remember I looked at him and I said, it's weird that this was my first thought, looking back, but in the moment, I was so worried that he was going to take his own life. And I just flat out asked him, I said, "Are you suicidal?" And he reached inside his pocket and he pulled out, I think he had like 3 or 4 bullets that he had in his pocket. And I look back and I'm like, I think that was planned. I really do. I
do too, Jimmy. I really, really do.
I don't think he was suicidal for a minute.
No. I think that was playing on your emotions. He needed support. Who better than you? You were connected to the church. He knew he was going to need a lot of support. Mm-hmm. He had been in trouble years before, which that's not pertinent to this, but he had been in trouble with the federal government for swindling money off of people, and he got out of that. He was the Lone Ranger who didn't get any prison sentence, and it was mostly because he had the support of his church family. So,
and not just that, I think this is very important to let people know. Not only did he have the support of all of us and have us convinced that he had never done anything wrong, he had his prosecuting attorney,
right,
who left his family on vacation and flew back to Pittsburgh to testify on my dad's behalf.
It was unreal.
I think that's unprecedented.
It is. It is just unbelievable. It really is. That he knew how to manipulate and work people that well. So I don't believe for a moment that he was going to take his life.
No, I don't either. Looking back, I don't for a second.
But in that context, when you were so emotional, and he's telling you for the very first time, here's your dad saying, this might sound crazy, Jimmy, but I did some bad touch. That's the first you had ever heard anything like that come from his mouth.
Right.
So, the whole scene is, when you look back now, it's a crazy scene.
Yeah.
It really is.
So I remember I tried to get him checked into to the hospital, and he refused. And so I ended up, in my mind, I thought in that moment, I was like, I don't want to be responsible for him, knowing that he's supposedly suicidal, right. And then I leave, and then he kills himself, and then that's going to be on me. There
was, at this point still, this was your dad. There was no separation between dad and the bad actions of dad. This was your dad, and you were responsible for this situation, in that you had been one of the ones to turn your father in. So, of course, there's an element of, I need to protect dad. I don't want dad to take his life. So you were just acting as a son.
Yeah. Well, I remember calling my wife and telling her, I was like, he's in no condition for me to leave and to come home. That did not sit well with her. And, because she knew that you and I had reported him, and right. She knew some of what he had done, and she was very upset with me. And I don't blame her. Looking back, I don't blame her one bit. She needed
your support then also, a lot more than he did. Right. Your family was in crisis on a number of different levels. It was a nightmare.
Yeah. So I did. I ended up spending the night. And, a lot of the rest was kind of a blur, but I'm just going to fast forward to whenever he did get arrested, and we had mentioned the last time that, we coordinated that with the detective, and so she let me know whenever he was going to be arrested so that I could inform my church. Then it was in the newspaper on Monday, so she wanted to give me time to inform the church before it landed in the papers. So I remember it was, I think the day it was in the newspaper, which was the next day. I think it was that Monday. You just had the article.
It was, right. Right.
But I was up at the church building, which, looking back, I was like, I can't believe I still was going up to work.
Well, of course you did, and I went into work that day.
We were just reading some of your notes from your journal.
Yep. Yeah, I sent my fellow employees an email and said that John was going to be arrested, but that I would see them at work. And I think we were in zombie mode. We had to do that. Yeah, we had to, or we would have shriveled up and crawled in a hole and never come out. I think.
So I got a phone call at the church building, and it was this woman on the other end, and she was just very short with me, and she said, this is your dad's landlord, and she said, I apologize that you're the one fielding the call, but because I was a minister, and you can Google my name, and I come up. None of the other family members come up, so I was the lucky recipient of that call. She called me up. She said, I hate that you're the one getting this call, but she said, you have 3 days to get your dad's crap out of that house. She said, and I mean it. She said, his stuff is out of there, or it's all getting burned. And so then I was like, great. And she literally hung up on me.
Yeah.
And it was just, there's so many layers to this, and just so much pain on top of pain, and just humiliation. And now, everybody in the community was aware, and that, and you're afraid to walk out of your door because you don't know what people are thinking.
Well, what was sad was, let me interject something just from my standpoint. You kids had been through a lot. We had been the model family. the relationship between your dad and I crumbled. It just, it wasn't an instant crumble. It was a kind of like an erosion over the years, just crumble, downhill, downhill, downhill. I felt I couldn't take it anymore, and he just, we separated, and then, that alone was embarrassing, humiliating, heartbreaking for all of us. It really, really was. It took me years to say the word divorce. And in fact, I will confess, I lied about it up until probably 2 years ago. People would say, "Are you still married?" And I would say, "Yes." And I'll talk about that maybe later. I know I've blogged about it, but when I got married, it was supposed to be for life. And I always told you kids that. But now, we were not together, but you kids, in getting your dad set up in his own apartment, if you recall, you threw him a retirement, you called it that, a retirement party, because you felt so bad for your dad that he would not get a retirement party. And we all chipped in money, myself included, to get dad set up in this apartment. You all paid for that, paid to get him in, helped him get set up, and now it's your job to go into this apartment and disassemble it just months later. Just a few short months later.
Yeah, he wasn't in it very long at all.
No.
So, and the irony too, and I think this is something that people need to hear too, like looking back, you just realize how I think God puts strategic people in strategic places for very strategic reasons.
I absolutely believe that.
And, the only reason that my wife and I are even in the state of Pennsylvania is because we moved up from Arkansas. I was just about to graduate from seminary. She had just graduated from graduate school, and we had no idea where we wanted to live and locate. And so you and Dad had separated, and we felt very sorry for him. We felt like,
he was like a lost puppy dog.
Up and kicked him out, and because that's how he pitched it to us. And he was good at playing on emotions. So the only reason that we moved up to Pennsylvania was to really take care of him. He lived with my wife and I for the first 2 years that we moved up here.
Right.
And had we not moved up here, I don't know who, the survivor who came forward, I don't know who she would have told, if she would have told anyone.
Right. And I think you are absolutely right on that. And I do believe that was the hand of God in our lives all the way through that separation. Because had it not been for that, you and your wife would not have been here to help out your dad.
Yeah, so it's very ironic that he's the reason that we moved up here.
Right.
And then this chain of events happened, and we played a pivotal part in putting him in prison.
Absolutely.
So, we got the phone call from the landlord, and I remember calling some of the siblings, and I was like, we need to go over there and assemble a team. And he had so much crap is the only word I can, probably not the best term, but he was a hoarder, and he just had so much stuff. And we dreaded going over there because we knew we were going to have truckloads of stuff. And what do you do with it? I mean, that's the other issue.
I remember you all discussing it. Do we give it to the thrift store?
Yeah.
Do we store it? Do we keep it?
We didn't know how long. We didn't know how long he had just been arrested. We didn't know, was he going to be arrested and get out in 6 months?
Shoes, boots, hunting clothes, guns. What do you do with? I mean, he had
bicycles. All kinds of stuff.
Right.
All kinds of stuff.
Right.
So, so we did. I mean, we assembled a team, and we went in there. And I still, to this day, I have very vivid memories of not so much about the stuff, but the the paraphernalia, I guess is what I'll call it, that he used to abuse these little girls. And I remember just feeling so sick. And we're going through his apartment, and there were, Ziploc bags full of supplies that he used to abuse these kids. And I couldn't believe it. I was like, and we were all talking about this, and it was like the elephant was in the room.
Right.
And we're cleaning out these gallon Ziploc bags full of stuff, and we all knew exactly what it was and what it was used for. And we're just filling trash bags full of this stuff. And I remember being angry at the police department. And we were like, they knew that the family at some point was going to be coming in here to clean this up. And they didn't get rid of that stuff. And they didn't keep it as evidence. They didn't, which I guess they didn't need to.
Right.
But in our mind, we're like, they should have had the decency to take this stuff out. But looking back again, it's not their job. No. And for them, they did their job. They gathered up the evidence, and it's not their job to clean the apartments out for the families. And I think
in some way, Jimmy, that even though at the time it was shock upon shock upon shock, without seeing that,
yes,
it's very hard to believe that actually existed.
Yes. And I think you're absolutely right. And I needed to see that stuff to help process, because I was the only one who visited him in county jail. He was in county jail for, I think it was a little under a year.
It was 11 months, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So I went up every single week for that 11 months and visited him once a week. And he just was so convincing, even though I know it was total garbage and he was lying through his teeth. He was so convincing at telling me that, it was just very minor stuff that he had done to these kids. And, he was hopeful that he was just going to get a super light sentence, and he was going to be back out, and everything was going to be good. And I don't know that he really believed that. I think he was just trying to play on my sympathies.
And I think that's something that our listeners need to understand too. Pedophiles, these abusers, are masterful at lying. Mm-hmm. They weave and they lie and they create a web that traps and pulls people in that is very believable.
Very believable.
Very, very believable. And here you were visiting, not as the person that turned your dad in, but as his son. You were his son visiting. You were there, and he definitely played on your sympathy. And had you not seen what you saw in that apartment, you would have fallen into that trap.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's why I tell churches when I do consulting and training with churches, I hear it inevitably. I would say probably 100% of the time. I can't think of any times where I didn't hear this. So I'd say I'm pretty confident in saying it's 100% of the time, where the church leaders will come back and they'll say, well, this guy did spend some time in prison, and, it was sex crimes against children. And then they'll go into this narrative, and I know exactly where it's coming from. And they'll say, but it was just with one kid, and it was always 20, 30 years ago.
Right.
And they're so sorry for what they've done, and they've just been doubled over with pain from the guilt, and they've been in prison in their own mental prison while they're in the physical prison. And, I can write the script for this.
Right.
And so I'll come back and I'll say, okay, where did you get that information from? And they look at me like they don't have a clue what I'm talking about. And they're like, well, what do you mean?
Right.
He told us that. And I'm like, who, the abuser? Well, yeah. And I say, no, that's not acceptable. That's not okay. You don't take their word for it ever. Mm-hmm. They lost that right. When they raped a child, they lost the right to be trusted. So you need to actually pull up their records, and you need to find out what they did. How many victims do they have? Are they a tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3 abuser? Are they a sexually violent predator? How long were they incarcerated? What was the nature of their sex crimes against the children? How many charges got waived as part of the plea deal.
I was going to say,
you need to find all that out.
Even at that, you and I know that when someone is incarcerated, not all of their crimes have been accounted for.
Not even
hardly.
Close. Not even close.
And, that can be something saved for another time, but the abuser will almost 100% of the time say, it was an isolated case. I don't know what came over me.
Yep.
I don't know why I did it, or that child just came up to me and for some unknown reason, I touched the child in a wrong way.
And it was just a misunderstanding.
It was a misunderstanding, and I didn't mean it to be like that. And so it's a script that could be repeated over and over again. The abusers seem to have a language and a script all their own. But yeah, your dad, of course, he fed you that line, and you would have fallen for it, except you were in his apartment. You saw what was in there.
Yep.
You knew what was in there. So,
in the basement we found, there were just tons of toys. The whole basement was full of brand new toys, stuffed animals. All the stuff that you could imagine. So I think, I don't even remember what we did with all of that. I think
a lot of it got carried to the thrift store.
Yeah, I think the brand new stuff we donated, and then anything that was used, I think, went to the dumpster. And then we had, my wife and I got stuck with his car, and I remember that. And we were like, what do we do with this? Because again, we didn't know how long he was going to be in jail, and we said if he's in jail for 2 or 3 months, and we weren't guaranteed that he was going to get any prison time.
Absolutely.
We were told that by the detective. Right. She's like, I can't guarantee anything. She said, I will sign, seal, and deliver this case to the district attorney, but from there, it's out of my hands. So, we were like, what do you do with the car? Do you keep it?
I think you mentioned before, and maybe it wasn't last week's podcast, but the week before, in a sense, this is worse than if your dad had died, or if the abuser or the loved one had died, because then you can say, okay, the car has to go. We close up the apartment,
right? Close the bank account. We had all that stuff to deal with. Bank accounts.
I was going to say you had everything.
We had debt collectors calling us. Right. Why hasn't he paid this bill? It was just insane.
And there
so
are
much
all
stuff
the
that we had to deal
legal
with.
things to deal with. He couldn't sign a check to endorse a check that came to him while he's in prison. You had to become power of attorney, all kinds of legal messes to deal with too, while you're trying to function as the son who is broken, as the minister who has a broken church, as the son who stepped up to the plate and is taking care of the family, the large family that you had, your own family. It was again, just a hellish type of nightmare.
And it was just ongoing.
Yeah, a cycle that wouldn't end. Just snowballed, kept snowballing and snowballing.
So, I remember we finally decided, my wife, God bless her, because she had much clarity. She's like, we're getting rid of the car. She said, and if you don't get rid of it, she's like, I'll drive it off a cliff. She's like, I don't want that stupid thing sitting in my driveway. She said, every time we look at that dumb car, it's a reminder of him.
Yeah.
And so we put it in the garage and we started emptying it out. And I will never forget, that trunk, I call it his mobile grooming station. It was just full of all kinds. Literally so full, you couldn't put a sandwich bag full of something in it. Full to the brim of all kinds of stuff, all kid-related stuff, swimsuits, suntan lotions, baby oil, tents, because that was his thing too, was taking kids out camping. You name it, it was in that trunk, and we had to clean all that garbage out.
no little task.
No.
Very
and it's
emotional.
just emotionally exhausting.
Very, very emotional. Just to see that and to know the story behind why those items were in his car. And to this day, I still shake my head and don't know how you did it. Yeah. I had no part in any of the cleanup, and I was, kept from that. My children, my sons, basically dealt with that.
And that was very intentional.
It was. I know that.
We'd all talked about that and said that for, we felt you had been through enough.
It just
and
was
we said we're not going to ask her
terrible
to have any part in this.
Terrible. Absolutely. I'll add one little thing that comes up all the time, and then Jimmy and I will be bringing this to a close. People ask still, didn't you see some kind of signs? Didn't you lived with this man, you were married to him for more than 30 years, close to 40 years. Wasn't there some kind of something? He had been molesting children all along. And I'll say no. I blogged about it on findingahealingplace.com. You can read it. I won't go into detail here. John had oddities, little odd things that would crop up all the time, but nothing that stood out like a neon sign saying, I molest children. Nothing at all. Now, the last 6 months when John got his own apartment, he was just so bold with what he was doing. And Jimmy and I talked about that a little bit ago. It was like he went hog wild crazy, picking kids up from the church and community, taking them on picnics alone, never an adult with him. Never an adult with him. Taking them swimming, taking them out to eat.
Sleepovers at his apartment.
Sleepovers at his apartment. His own mother, when she found out about that, I remember I was told she got him on the phone and started screaming at him and said, "Don't you understand? You can't do that. You're a single adult. You can't have little kids over for a sleepover." And he said, "Why not? I'm babysitting kids from church. I'm helping their parents out. I'm giving them a break." I argued with him, and that's the line he fed me. And he said, "I'm lonely, and I miss being around kids. I'm helping these parents out because when you were alone with all of our kids, I didn't help you. And I promised myself if I ever got a chance, I'd help another parent." Guess what? I fell for it. I believed it. And, sadly,
I think deep down we probably didn't. Like, our intuition, I think, definitely said there's something weird, but he was just so convincing. And that's, when you talk to him face to face,
right,
he can deflate any anxiety that you have, any concerns you have.
He had a very
and he's just very convincing.
Like you said, you and your wife moved from Arkansas to come support your dad because I was not living with him anymore. How many adult children do that to a parent? Parents, he's a big boy, but he had this countenance that he was so broken, so pitiful. He was going to run his car in a tree. He was going to run off a cliff because mother isn't with me anymore. And you kids were used and abused also.
I think it's important too to note, when I watched the Larry Nassar sentencing, if you look at the look on his face, he's just he's sunken and sullen and he's crying.
Yes.
And he just looks like this little fragile, broken man who's just so remorseful. And then out comes the letter that Judge Aquilina read, and I was standing up and cheering at my computer, and I was like, yes, because you begin to fall for it. And
you do.
And he just looked so pitiful and so remorseful, and what a soft spoken, he's owning
gentleman.
up. Yeah, and he's polite, and he's owning up. He's owning up to what he did.
Right.
And then she drops that bombshell, and she reads portions of that letter, and she said, there are parts of this letter that I will never make public. Mm-hmm. She said, and believe me, I have media who they are hounding me to make that whole letter public, and I have the authority to do that, but I will not do it because it's so disgusting that it will re-traumatize every single one of these survivors.
Yes. And I'm so glad you said that.
And even the parts that she read were absolutely just demented, evil, mean-spirited, and nasty. Mm-hmm. He was an absolute nasty man in that letter, but when you look at him, and he knew the cameras are on, and so he cranked it up.
He sure did.
He was very disciplined in looking sullen and broken, and he did. You just look at him and you do. Absolutely.
Feel sorry for him. I'm glad you brought that out, Jimmy.
So I think people need to hear that. They always soften when they're face to face with the abuser, and I think it's important to start digging, and we have an obligation to dig deep and to look at the facts and not just look at the person who's in front of us and take their word because they're crying. We have sympathy for them. I promise you, that's not a good method. We need to find out what they did, and we have a responsibility to do that.
Jimmy, I think it's probably time we end this session for now. I think we've given our listeners enough to think about right now, and we'd like to end with this truth bomb for today. Believe the unbelievable when a child tells, because children don't make up stories like this. Believe and let your child know that no matter what happened, it wasn't their fault, and your love for them will never, ever change. That's so very important. And with that thought, I think we'll close up today's session.
Absolutely. Thank you for listening to this episode, and don't forget to subscribe and share. As always, thank you for tuning in to the Speaking Out on Abuse podcast with Jimmy and Clara Hinton. You can subscribe to the podcast through either of our websites, findingahealingplace.com, jimmyhinton.org, or through iTunes. Please subscribe and share so you never miss an episode.